The text came in while I was standing in line for coffee, phone balanced in one hand, the other digging for my wallet. It was written like an aside, like something said over a shoulder while leaving the room. I only took a little money from your card. I'll pay it back. No greeting. No apology. The sentence ended with a period that felt smug, like punctuation could do the work of permission. I didn't answer. I ordered my coffee, waited for my receipt, and walked out into a morning that was already too bright. There's a particular brightness that makes you feel observed, even when no one's looking. I opened my banking app at the crosswalk because I knew better than to pretend this was nothing. The numbers took a second to load. Then they rearranged themselves into something I didn't recognize. 400 gone. It didn't register as anger. Not at first. It felt like a room going quiet after a door closes, pressure equalizing. I stood there long enough that a driver honked, not angry, just alerting me to the fact that I was in the way. I walked home with the coffee untouched. When I got inside, I set it on the counter and watched steam lift and thin. I sat down. I looked again. I did the math twice, like repetition might turn it into a mistake. I called my mother because that's what you do when you need the family to acknowledge reality. She answered on the second ring, already moving, already busy. She took how much? She asked. Then before I could finish, don't be petty. It's family. Petty. The word landed like a verdict that had been waiting for a case. I tried to explain timing, rent, the fact that my card wasn't a communal object, but she had already moved on to reassurance. She's under a lot of stress. My mother said, voice softening. You know how she is. You always land on your feet. I always land on my feet. It's the compliment that becomes an expectation. The thing you say to the person you intend to fall on. I hung up without saying goodbye. I didn't slam the phone down. I didn't cry. I felt something settle into place, like a decision that had been forming for years, finally finished assembling itself. My sister texted again an hour later. A heart emoji this time. A promise to figure it out. I imagined her saying it aloud, breezy, already elsewhere. I imagined the familiar pattern: delay, justification, a partial repayment framed as generosity, and then the slow evaporation of the rest. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop. There's a particular calm that comes from paperwork when you've spent your life explaining yourself to people who don't need proof. I gathered statements. I highlighted transactions. I noted timestamps. I saved screenshots with file names that did not editorialize. I didn't call her. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Silence, in my family, reads as compliance. It's a misunderstanding I have learned to use. I contacted my bank and reported the charges. The person on the other end asked me to confirm that I had not authorized them. I said no. The word felt clean. The process unfolded with a professionalism that was almost kind. They told me what would happen next. They told me timelines. They told me I would receive an email. I closed the laptop and went to work. The day moved the way days to narrate them as crises, meetings, emails, lunch eaten too fast. At some point, I noticed I was breathing shallowly and corrected it, like adjusting posture. This wasn't restraint as virtue, it was containment. I knew better than to pour myself into a confrontation that would go nowhere. That night, my mother called again. I let it ring. Then my sister. Then my aunt, because news travels fast when it's framed as concern. I listened to the voicemail from my aunt later. She said my name the way people do when they think you've made things awkward. I slept. At 7:58 the next morning, my phone buzzed with an email from the bank confirming receipt of my documentation and notifying me that they had contacted the merchant accounts involved. The language was neutral. The tone was procedural. Authority doesn't raise its voice. At 8:00 a.m., my sister logged into her email. I didn't hear the scream. I learned about it later, from a neighbor who mentioned it in passing, like a detail from the weather. Apparently it echoed down the street, sharp enough to draw someone to a window. Apparently she dropped her phone. Apparently she said my name. What I know is this: the email informed her that her account was under review for unauthorized use of a linked card, that certain funds were being frozen pending investigation, that additional documentation would be required. It was written by someone who did not know her, did not care how she was, and did not confuse closeness with consent. By 8:12 my phone was ringing. I watched it light up and go dark. I made tea, By 80:30, my mother texted me a paragraph that began with "What did you do?" and ended with "This could ruin her." I replied with one sentence. I reported fraud. There was a pause long enough to feel intentional. Then, "You didn't have to go that far. That's the family metric, I've learned, not right or wrong. Near or far. How much discomfort you are allowed to introduce before you're accused of excess." The bank credited my account provisionally that afternoon. The money returned without ceremony, numbers slotting back into place like they'd never left. I stared at the screen, waiting for relief to bloom. It didn't. What I felt instead was a quiet steadiness, like standing on ground that no longer shifted when someone else leaned. My sister showed up at my door that evening. I didn't open it. Through the wood, I heard her voice cycle through tonant, pleading, angry, wounded. She said I'd embarrassed her. She said I'd overreacted. She said she would have paid me back. I leaned my forehead against the door and listened until she left. In the weeks that followed, the family rearranged itself around the new fact of me. Some people were distant. Some were careful. No one apologized in a way that cost them anything. I didn't ask for it. I didn't explain myself again. The story had already been told by an authority that didn't accept emotional footnotes. My sister's account was unfrozen eventually, with conditions. She repaid fees she hadn't anticipated. The investigation closed with language that was, again, neutral. There was no dramatic reckoning. No courtroom speech. Just consequences administered by a system that did not confuse love with leniency. Sometimes I think about that morning, about the coffee going cold on my counter, about how easy it would have been to swallow the loss and call it harmony. I don't tell myself I chose growth. I don't dress it up as forgiveness. I tell myself something simpler: I stopped agreeing to disappear. The street is quiet now. When I check my balance, it holds. When my phone lights up, I decide whether to answer. And in that space, small, uncelebrated, I feel the dignity of being taken seriously, even if it costs me the comfort of being endlessly accommodating.